Narcissistic relationships are where people get lost. You lose your sense of self, what you stand for, what matters to you, your values, your friends. You slowly get infected with their version of events and even lose your perspective on reality. It's very unsettling. Let's talk about how you manage social media with a narcissistic ex-partner during a breakup or after a breakup. Listen, normal people grieve a relationship, and grief takes time. It may mean taking a minute, and oftentimes you'll hold back on social media, waiting a minute to sort of get your stride back. But unfortunately, with narcissistic ex-partners, social media becomes one more place of insensitivity and one more weapon for them to be able to taunt, stalk, and manipulate with. They are certainly not going to turn away from a tool that is so important for them to use to get validation. And when it comes to the post-breakup world, it's a dangerous place. Honestly, it's not good for your mental health if you're trying to heal from one of these breakups. That inability, that incapacity for intimacy that characterizes the narcissistic person means that they are able to move rather quickly into new dating relationships and sexual relationships. It can sometimes feel like it's happening immediately. It's like the quickest rebound in history, right? They're able to proclaim love for a new person in a few days and are more prone to talk about soulmates and twin flames and past lives than the rest of us. The cycle of the narcissistic relationship, the trauma bonded up and down, together, then not together, together, then not together, the fighting, then making up, makes these relationships exciting, evocative, and familiar, and very, very hard to break out of these cycles. In addition, infidelity is so often a part of the narcissistic relationship landscape, and the betrayal, the deceit, and after the breakup, that sort of psychological punch in the chest of not being chosen and sometimes wanting to fight to be back in it can really keep people stuck. Your rational brain knows that being out is the best thing for you. Your trauma-bonded brain keeps saying, hey, let's go get back in there. But these relationships end. And even when every rational neuron in your brain is saying, yay, you did it, you're out, so great, everything's good, you can finally have your reality and your life back. Despite all those rational neurons, many people feel ambivalent about these breakups or even hurt. So let's break down what the post-breakup landscape after a narcissistic relationship ends can look like. Number one, pretty quickly thereafter, they'll often post lots of fun activities. They'll be on vacation, they'll be at a hotspot or an event or at a party. They may be in the picture with some of your mutual friends or with some new attractive people or person you do not know. They may even be doing things like skydiving, barbecuing, hiking. They'll be living the damned life of Riley, and you may be home in the days still nursing a broken heart, or just that fear of being alone, or the confusion that accompanies the post-breakup landscape for anyone. Number two, they may start posting about a new person, and this can happen pretty quickly. You may be shocked that the ashes aren't even cold on your relationship, and they're out there sharing their new love story, making all kinds of proclamations of love and excitement and nonsense about how I never knew love before. It's like seeing your relationship be invalidated and at the same time watching the love bombing that you experienced happen to someone else. And this is a very difficult period, even as your wise mind tells you that this relationship being over is the best thing that could happen. Witnessing the images of someone else having the exciting, love-bombed experience that you did can bring up that trauma-bonded sense and the euphoric recall, of course, of wanting it all back and getting stuck in the rumination and staring at social media, looking at the images. The euphoric recall can lead you to forget all of the bad things that happened to you, and you will make the ultimate error sometimes. That ultimate error is that you will believe that they have changed for the new person. They have not changed. They will not change. If anyone saw your love bombing pictures, it would have looked the same to them. And this story with the new person's going to end the same way. Number 3, you may also see them posting angry, victimized stuff, especially if your former partner was a vulnerable narcissist, sometimes called a covert narcissistic person. You will see the passive-aggressive rants, the barbs, even really mean DMs coming at you. This may leave you feeling guilty, especially if you ended it. And it may make you vulnerable to want to reach out and make sure that they're okay, because you had this guilt that, oh, I don't know how they're ever going to kind of get through the days without my help. Number 4, you may also just want to start living your life and start sharing the things that you're doing in your life. Then you notice that they are still following you and you aren't comfortable with it. So you block that one account and then they're still following you with fake accounts. It doesn't feel good, and certainly setting an account to private can help with that, especially if you don't want them peering into your life and potentially ruining some of the new things that you're doing. Number 5, they may use social media to get in touch with you, perhaps to hoover you, perhaps to gaslight you, but they'll use it as a way to try to keep engaging with you if that's the game they're playing. So please drop a comment below and let me know if you've experienced any of these, or if you can think of other ways that social media was used by a narcissist that you know, or a story you've heard of after a breakup. So you know all of this, right? You know all of these things. So what do you do? What do you do after a breakup with social media? Obviously, the simplest way forward is to block them. The research is pretty clear. We know that no contact works. And while it may not always be possible to go fully no contact with someone for a variety of reasons, such as co-parenting, custody, or employment, there is no reason that they need to be on your social media. So the simplest way forward is to set your account to private and block them. The next thing, stop looking at their stuff. Unfollow them and do whatever you need to do to not look. This is harder because this requires self-discipline. The other thing you need to do, just block your account and make it private, and so they don't see yours. That's actually a lot easier to do. But figure out ways to put blocks on your social media use on your phone. Some social media, you can even sort of create it so that it's harder to use it or shut it down after a certain period of time. Create a list of distractions instead of being on a device. If you can find the discipline to not look at an ex's social media, it will help. Remind yourself, through a little radical acceptance, that the next person is going to go through exactly what you did, maybe even worse. And so too will the next person and the next person. No, that next person did not, and they will not get a happily ever after. You know their MO, love bomb, devalue, discard, and it will happen again. The triangulated dynamic that if there is someone new that they go with very quickly can sometimes make people want to fight for their narcissistic ex. Don't do it, because each time you get back in, it's harder to get out. If their game is to keep stalking you via passive-aggressive social media posts, menacing DMs, recruiting flying monkeys via social media, this will take a toll on you. Over time, it's very bad for your mental health to experience this online trolling. Again, the only path forward is to cut them out of your social media. To look and have them look is masochistic. And as long as you are thinking about it or looking at it, you are still wasting mental real estate on this relationship as long as you engage with their social media. Clean up your social media. Remove the enablers, the exes, friends, anyone that activates the uncomfortable feelings. Anyone that may give your ex information about you that you do not want them to have. Consider it sort of a toxic cleanup. Make any personal social media tight and turn it into a safe space. Many people will say that their relationship with social media changed permanently after they got out of a narcissistic relationship. It was such a psychologically painful space of hurt, confusion, invalidation. Some people will even say that the notifications that they would get, as the push notifications on their phone, would start making them feel sick because of the history they'd had with it. So if something's making us sick, what do? We stop eating it, or we stop breathing it if we can avoid it, or we stop looking at it. It may be that moving forward, social media becomes a place where it was almost like aversive conditioning. It's a space that brought up so many negative feelings that you may stop gravitating toward it. But it's a painful journey to get there. And as a important point, in a divorce or even in a workplace legal proceeding, social media can be brought into the conversation or discovery of a legal procedure. Anything that could even be vaguely interpreted or framed as problematic, and you'd be surprised, even things like you with a glass of wine in your hand, or you doing something that could be seen as unsafe, or you saying something that is perceived as defamatory, could come back and bite you in legal proceedings. So the easiest path forward is don't do it. And keep in mind that in a world with social media, somebody is always watching. So behave and post accordingly. Relationships with narcissistic people turn social media into a psychological minefield. So please tread lightly. So I was reading something the other day about adverse childhood experiences, which is the term we use to describe the things that can happen to a person in childhood, such as various forms of abuse and neglect, including physical, sexual, or emotional abuse, exposure to substance misuse by witnessing adults in the household doing that, exposure to mental illness in others in the home, suicidal behaviors by others in the home, or suicidal ideation by caregivers, exposure to domestic violence, incarceration of family members, particularly their caregivers, as well as other things that might be happening outside of the home, including things like bullying, community violence, the aftermath of natural disasters, refugee experiences, war, just adversity in all of its forms. Now, generally and statistically, these adverse childhood experiences are associated with a variety of poor outcomes for the child who experienced them going into adulthood. And these can include chronic health problems, mental health issues, a greater likelihood of unhealthy behaviors such as smoking or drug or alcohol use, and even social outcomes such as having problems with steady employment or issues doing well in school, right? So I was reading a transcript of a conversation between doctors Bruce Perry and Gabor Mate about adverse childhood experiences. This was part of my preparation. I'm about to give a big lecture on narcissistic parents and adverse childhood experiences, so I'm studying everything I can get my hands on, right? And there was an interesting observation they made in their interview. Simply saying, just the simple statement that adverse childhood experiences are bad and that's that, Dr. Perry pointed out that it's actually a little bit more complicated than that. That what happens to us in adulthood is actually very multi-determined. And from a probability standpoint, certainly adverse childhood experiences are not good. And we absolutely must protect children in these circumstances, or ideally prevent the adverse childhood experience from happening in the first place. But it's not a fatalistic determination. It's not a guarantee that everything's going to go badly for that child as an adult. He pointed out that social connectedness is protective, and that in people who had better outcomes after experiencing adverse childhood experiences, the social connectedness is what protected them. So following this line of reasoning, one thing I found as I prepared for this lecture, clearly from the literature, narcissistic parenting is associated with a higher risk for adverse childhood experiences, including emotional abuse, physical abuse, emotional neglect, a general lack of attunement and awareness of their own children, a role reversal with children being expected to anticipate their parents' needs and to care for and attune to the parent, right? So let's get back to that social connectedness part, because I come back to this time and time again when I talk about healing from narcissistic relationships, that it's our strongest tool for becoming more gaslight resistant, narcissism resistant, to manage the grief after narcissistic abuse, and most importantly, to heal and grow into our authentic selves. The social connectedness piece is essential to healing, and it connects to what they were talking about. The fact that the social connectedness matters so much is good to know, but can also feel quite disheartening for survivors who may have become so isolated in these relationships or family systems that they don't have these people, the socially connected people in their lives, and don't know how to start finding these people. Listen, there's lots of places to begin. Even one friendship is a place to start. Start giving that one friendship the care and nurturance that would allow it to benefit both of you, and start growing that relationship more and sharing and listening to them. If you have connections to healthy colleagues, build out those relationships more. Even if your conversations are just about work, at least if they see you clearly, that makes a difference. Take a class. Explore offerings in your community. Seeking out mental health care can also be a place to work on this, and also start having the experience of a healthy, validating experience or relationship with someone where you are seen and attuned to. Group therapy can also be a great place to not just get mental health support, but also connect with other people who are going through something similar to you, and support groups, and those are often far more affordable or even free. And while virtual communities may not always feel as fulfilling as relationships in real life, they're an important place to start. And I see the power of support in online forums of people who are good, compassionate, reasonable, self-aware, and simply kind. As long as they're well moderated, that can happen. Narcissistic relationships, by definition, are isolating. Either the narcissistic person literally isolates you, or they are so critical of people that you know that you don't bring people around, or they are judgmental of how your time is spent. So you may stop doing that, or you are ashamed of your relationship, so you don't connect to people, or your sense of self-worth erodes in a way that you don't feel confident meeting new people, or it's all of the above. It's not easy, and starting small is essential because the support matters. For years, you have been looking into the equivalent of a funhouse mirror that distorted how you are seen and reflected back. Simply spending an hour with someone who listens, who reflects back, who sees your goodness, who tracks the conversation, all of it, it can feel like a rebirth. And as Dr. Perry suggests, it becomes a place to remain resilient against any number of childhood wounds. Narcissistic relationships and the harms that they cause proliferate in the dark, where we have no validating voices or supports. It is one of the single most powerful healing tools. And while it is hard to get there, you start with one good person and you go from there. You don't need lots. This isn't about having a brigade of 25 folks around you. Even 1, 2, 3 people, relationships where it's a give and take, a back and forth. You simply feel taller and stronger after spending time in healthy relationships. And it becomes a self-sustaining system. These relationships, these healthy relationships where you're seen and felt, are the equivalent of turning on the lights. In the film Gaslight, the old school original film, the thing that set her free, the woman being gaslighted, was that one person showed her what was going on. Sometimes it just takes one. We waste so much time knocking ourselves out to be what the narcissistic person wants, and we get so little back. being present in healthy relationships actually gives you more energy and creates fertile ground for more healing. Always sharing the evidence when it comes up. Our pasts are not our destinies, and that there are wells we can draw upon to strengthen ourselves and stay strong in the face of what has happened to us. I was so glad I stumbled onto their conversation because it highlights what we know happens for people in narcissistic relationships. You can't do this alone, and I promise you that someday you will be this to someone else. In so many cases, you already are. I know this is the hardest part of healing, is finding those people, but you will. Remembering that by definition, narcissistic relationships leave us isolated can sort of help us remember why they can have such negative effects. But to understand that that social connectedness may be what stops this from kind of hurtling out of control and getting more and more severe in terms of the impact on you is such an important thing to know. I do want to put in a disclaimer that you want this 12 months on your own if the relationship lasted 2 years or longer. This isn't something if your relationship for a month. That's not what I'm talking about. But 1 year. 1 year. 365 days. 52 weeks. Okay? You heard that right. I get pushback on this suggestion all the time. Many people will say, I was lonely for years in this relationship, and now you are suggesting I need to be single for 12 months? Do you want me to die alone? I don't. And there is a method to what I'm suggesting here. Narcissistic relationships are where people get lost. You lose your sense of self, what you stand for, what matters to you, your values, your friends. You slowly get infected with their version of events and even lose your perspective on reality. It's very unsettling. So when people end relationships with narcissistic people, or the relationships end for whatever reason they do, there's a real temptation to be the sort of kid in the candy store, right? I'm out of this relationship. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to meet people. I'm going to do it all. And you want to feel loved, or maybe want a rebound relationship to make all the bad feelings go away. I get it. Because the only thing that can sometimes make that terrible feeling of the discard go away is the new love bomb. So like I said, I do have a disclaimer to this rule. If your narcissistic relationship lasted, well, let's say 2 years or less, I don't know that this full 12-month sort of detox is necessary. But if your relationship lasted more than 2 years, I gotta tell you, I strongly recommend a year. So the question then becomes, why? First, to have that 12 months on your own, there's no running away from the grief. Narcissistic relationships are one big study in grief. You're experiencing grief while you're in it. You experience grief as you experience the thousands of little losses you experience within the relationship, the loss of hope, the loss of reality, the loss of friends, the loss of identity. It's a lot. You lose yourself, and that's a lot to grieve. But you may not even be clear that you're losing yourself. You just know that the whole relationship feels heavy and sad and lonely, and that fills you with grief. And when it ends, you grieve the time spent, the time lost, the hopes lost, the you lost. All of this takes time to process. And it's not like the grief when someone dies. The narcissistic person is still alive, living their life, talking to your friends, posting on social media, perhaps even saying terrible things about you. So it's a long, dragged out process of grief. That grief needs some time to work its way through you, and it doesn't feel good. So you may find yourself trying to distract from this terrible feeling. Anything rather than feeling like this. A second reason for these 12 months is that it allows you to become acquainted with yourself again. You likely gave up a lot of yourself, your preferences, your wants, your hopes to be in this relationship. It could be silly. You may love pizza with some onions on it, but had to give that up years ago to relent to the narcissistic person's preferences. You may have simply given in to thermostat settings that were never right, having your experience and perceptions regularly doubted. of having to just give in just to keep the peace. It's time for you to go back to figuring out, what temperature do you like to keep the house at? What is your favorite pizza topping? To have the experience of saying, oh, the keys are right where I put them. Or to taste something and say, this is spicy, without the other person saying, no, it's not. Coming back to yourself again isn't just superficial stuff like pizza toppings. It's deeper stuff like your values, how you want to spend your time, the way you want to treat people. That takes time too. I often suggest that clients make a list of the things that they gave up to be in this relationship, from the superficial, pizza toppings, to the sublime, to the deep. And in those months after the relationship, start doing all that stuff you had to give up on, whatever they are. So a third reason for this is it allows you to create a healthy social world. Narcissistic relationships mean isolation, shame, which may isolate you from friends or family because you don't want them to see your relationship. Or you have been told so many bad things about these people that you don't want to see them. Or your friends may have disconnected because they don't want to witness what you're going through anymore or hear about it anymore. Or you don't trust yourself socially because you have been criticized for so long, or self-monitored yourself so carefully now because you're often told you look or sound foolish. For people coming out of narcissistic relationships, it can be a time of building bridges again, getting support for friends who are probably happy to see you out of the relationship, connecting with healthy family members, or slowly reaching into new spaces to make new friends. Building these healthy social connections is good for your health and creates that sort of social capital that can foster your healing and be a buffer against future toxic relationship situations. A fourth reason for this year alone is it forces you to do some things alone. Nothing builds efficacy like having to figure stuff out for yourself. This may be finances, fixing things, planning a trip, solving problems. Narcissistic people are notoriously controlling and will either insist on doing things themselves and not sharing what they're doing, or criticizing what you are doing, which may inhibit you from wanting to try doing them. Over time, you may feel unskilled or incapable or internalizing the sense of incompetence, which isn't true. Doing things begets a sense of competence and makes us want to do more things. Narcissistic people can be so dominating, so contemptuous, that they often treat you as though you are literally incompetent. You aren't. So take this time, take this year to learn to do things, practice or learn new skills, and dispel this idea that the narcissistic person may have filled you with, that you can't do anything. You can. Give it a try. A fifth reason is having a year off helps you build new traditions and get past all those anniversary dates that happen in a year. 1 year means 1 year of holidays, summer, vacations, their birthday, your anniversary, and those days can be taken back. Red letter days, whatever, holidays, special days, are a mess with narcissistic people. They always manage to ruin them for everyone, or they are disappointed by them, or they let you down. So take them back and don't fall for any hoovering on those days. Celebrate these, whatever these days are, with friends or alone. Make a new tradition. Go on a trip you wanted to take. But getting through the first year of these dates, these anniversary dates as they were, strengthens your fortitude. A year is a really long and a really short period of time. If during that year you were to meet someone intriguing or compelling, you don't need to tell them you're on a 12-month detox. But you can say that you're just taking life, love, and relationships slow, that you would love to build a friendship with this person. Listen, I've worked with people who have done both, who didn't take the 12 months and went into something new, and those who waited the 12. Over time, the data kind of accumulated. It was very clear The folks who took the 12 months were much further along in their process of healing, growth, individuation, health, just grounding, a sense of grounding. The folks who got into a new relationship within the year often ended up right back in toxic relationships. Nobody can tell you what to do. I'm not going to tell you this is a rule. But hold and sit with this idea for a minute and recognize that healing from any form of relational or narcissistic abuse often happens best when you're not in that kind of relationship, but instead have other supports around you. It allows you to take back the thing that was stolen, which is you. So have you ever looked back at yourself in your history and how you behaved and how you were in a past narcissistic relationship? Frankly, any narcissistic relationship. It may have been an intimate relationship, a family relationship, a friend, even a workplace. And you look back a little like you're looking at someone you don't fully recognize in yourself. And you're almost thinking of yourself like, ew, or what was I thinking? Or why did I do that? Or how could I have done that? And the things you look back on and ask yourself, how could I have done that? Or why did I do that? Or why didn't I do it better? Or why was I just so ick? They aren't always related to the narcissistic relationship. Sometimes we look back and wonder, why wasn't I thriving or doing better in the other things I was doing? For example, I've talked and worked with lots of folks who look back on things like how they were in a job or a professional setting, or how they were in raising their children. And they regret many things they did, more than the regret than the average person would experience. But they also recognize they were often distracted and thrown off by their narcissistic relationship, or they were running themselves ragged to please the narcissistic person so that other things were going poorly in their lives because they just couldn't bring their full selves to anything but the impossible task of trying to please the narcissistic person. Has that ever been you, that you look back and say, ooh, that's how I was? My guess it's been most of us. These regrets, looking back at ourselves in these relationships, often hold people back from moving forward and fully healing from narcissistic or toxic, invalidating relationships. When we are in a narcissistic relationship, or even in the early stages of healing, we're confused. These relationships, by definition, are confusing because they are not always bad. They are sometimes even good. They may give us a sense of belonging. We may need them for our very survival. But when they are bad, they are really bad and frankly, psychologically harmful. So we are not at our best. Confused people, for example, are not efficient or organized. Confused people are distracted. Because when we are in the throes of the narcissistic relationship and really do not understand what is happening to us, we put everything into the narcissistic relationship, believing that there's some combination of things we can do to finally get it right. It can take a long time to realize that this isn't about getting it right or being enough, because those things aren't possible. It's nothing we do is ever going to be enough for a narcissistic person, and that is a them thing, not a you thing. It's kind of a miracle, to me at least, that people in narcissistic relationships or systems actually wake up every day and fight the good fight. One way we as clinicians can often discern the difference between a person going through narcissistic abuse from other clinical issues like generalized anxiety or depression is that the person going through narcissistic abuse will often thrive or shine or be happy when they're not with the narcissistic person. They'll often be happy when they're amongst the healthy people who are in their lives or doing something that they enjoy doing separate from the narcissistic person. The heaviness, the sadness, the frustration and worry all emanate from the unsolvable puzzle of the narcissistic relationship. Don't get me wrong. There are more than a small proportion of people who are experiencing narcissistic abuse, who are also enduring other major psychiatric issues such as depression or relatively severe anxiety. But for many, the time with the narcissistic person is what's at the core of the unhappiness and the haze and the self-blame of why can't I be good enough to make this relationship work. But when we take that person and put them into something that's enjoyable or fun, they're in it, which we wouldn't see in somebody who might be experiencing other clinical issues. So when you look back at the things where you cringe and say, I wish I had been better, gosh, I wish I'd been stronger, I wish I'd been more courageous, I wish I'd broken up with them sooner, I wish I'd been more focused in school, in my job, I wish I'd been more a present parent or a better friend, I wish I'd been a better family member to my good family members instead of constantly spinning around and trying to do for the selfish ones. When you look back at that, you have to remember and really tell yourself that in most cases, you did the very best you could under the circumstances. And the fact is, nobody explained what the circumstances were to you. Basically, you were trying to climb a mountain with a 200-pound bag on your back, and you weren't aware that that 200-pound bag was on your back, and you were wondering why you were struggling so much to get up the slope. It is essential to look back at the you that was in the relationship, the you that was slowly transitioning out of the relationship, the you that was attempting to heal, and recognize that you was up against a lot. Even if you were in therapy, and if the therapist did not use the frame of how a narcissistic relationship works, or you're being given the standard lines of communicate more clearly, or have date nights, or you were being told that family is everything and you only have one mother kind of nonsense. You were actually trying to work and do a big jigsaw puzzle that had lots of pieces missing, and you were wondering why you couldn't see it clearly or get it done. And we have really finite resources within us to get through a day. We cannot be perfect at work and perfect in our caregiving or household responsibilities and perfect with all of our friends and perfect with how we take care of ourselves. Even on a good day, that's not possible. But we sure as hell can't even get close to getting anything even right if we're running around in circles trying to read a narcissistic person's mind while trying to do all of these other things. Most of us, when we were in these narcissistic relationships, did the best we can with the information we had. We actually remembered to put together healthy lunches for kids, even as our mind was racing and playing out abusive conversations repeatedly over and over in our heads. We showed up at work and probably did better than we thought, despite getting unreasonable and demanding text messages from the narcissists in our lives all day. We made holidays happen despite the toxicity inherent in those days. We got through life running on 2 tracks. One track was the rumination about the narcissistic relationships we were in, and the other track was the stuff we actually had to do in the present moment to keep life going. You have to remember that when you were in the muck of the narcissistic relationship, none of us were our best selves. Especially before you recognize what a narcissistic relationship is and still didn't fully understand it. Narcissistic relationships are parasitic and basically siphon off the best parts of ourselves, leaving us to make do with what is left. That is, until we understand how these relationships work. One of the places that all of this plays out most painfully is in the area of parenting. When you are in a relationship with or married to a narcissistic person and, for example, trying to raise children, it is all but impossible to be a fully present parent. Before you know what narcissism is about, you are trying your hardest to make the relationship or the marriage work, or you are still in denial about the idea that your partner or spouse will ever contribute equally to parenting, So you eternally have the same arguments with them about school pickups and bath time. Some of you may have had to endure the hellscape of co-parenting with a narcissist and the abuse, the pettiness, the fear, the anger, and the having to communicate regularly with someone you hope to never have to see again. And it can really erode for a period of time our capacity to be our best selves as parents. And we may look back and recognize that we were distracted or irritable or not present, or may have said the wrong thing or missed something our children were going through. And in some cases, one of your children may grow up and start showing narcissistic patterns as an adult. And the first place many parents in this situation will go to, especially the non-narcissistic parent, is to blame themselves, feeling that, well, I wasn't present and I didn't protect them enough from the narcissistic parent, etc., etc. Those of you who've gone through this, you know the drill. It's not that simple. Because those of you who may have a narcissistic child, if you do have more than one child, you may see that not all of them are narcissistic or manipulative, and you are the same with all of them. But when we look back at who we were before we fully understand this, we are very hard on ourselves. And even when we do understand it, we're still hard on ourselves. You did your best in a terrible situation. Most of us did. Nobody is graceful when they are trying to survive. We are messy, unshowered, brittled, distracted, angry, sad, tired. Think of yourself in an airport after 24 hours and 2 days of flight cancellations. You ain't at your best. When we are in narcissistic relationships, we are feeling like that every day. You did your best in a tough, impossible situation, and you learned, and hopefully are radically accepting and grieving and shifting and caring for yourself, and discerning, and distancing, and disengaging. Healing at its core is about being gentler with ourselves. Start by reframing those regrets. You didn't do badly. You actually did your best under toxic circumstances you didn't understand. Now you do, and it will get a little easier with each day. Thanks again.